Hey there, this is Celia. I'm going to continue on with my Lyme story. In this one, I'm going to talk about my first big flare when I was 20. So, if you want to go back and listen to the first part of how I got Lyme and what it was like for me as, a teen throughout high school, what undiagnosed Lyme and co-infections were like for me, you can check that out. Before I go into the story, I want to bring up a couple things. One is about what is a big flare? Now, this is a term that I use from a health storytelling and personal narrative standpoint. It's not a medical terminology. I don't even know how often this term is used, big flare, in chronic illness communities. There's no huge difference between a normal flare, which can be quite debilitating and extremely hard to deal with, and a big flare. Big flares and normal flares both can signify, pronounced symptomology that's hard to deal with. One isn't more severe than the other or more progressed. So I just want to take that out of it, that a big flare does not mean it's a more serious thing than a normal flare, if that makes sense. I use the term big flare from a personal storytelling or health narrative standpoint. The whole point of me telling my Lyme story is not necessarily to offer health advice or do anything kind of medical. And although I love to do that, that's my favorite thing to work with as an acupuncturist and an herbalist for 20 years. That's my specialty. I love that. But I want to differentiate that this storytelling aspect is very subjective. So what happens to me may be very different when happens to another person. There's so many different ways that Lyme and the co-infections can manifest. So it's less about the details and more about, I hope, to inspire you or anyone else who's dealing with chronic pain, chronic illness, trauma, chronic infections, what have you, to write out or record into a phone or make videos of your own health story, because it really, really can be cathartic and therapeutic. For one thing, when you do health storytelling, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end on what we could consider to be a chapter within our health. I'm looking back 20 years ago, there was this certain thing that happened I'm going to talk about today. And it's why it's so therapeutic is because if you have chronic illness, chronic pain, chronic infections, trauma, whatever you're healing from, then you know that there rarely is a beginning, a middle, and an end to what you're going through. It kind of cycles through. You're in kind of an up and down. It's more like a roller coaster. You don't really get off the ride. It just continues going, and you can manage things better. And sometimes you do get cured, which is amazing. But the point of health storytelling is to kind of delineate and put together aspects of your story that if you were to talk about your health as a whole, there's no beginning, a middle, and end. But if you break it down, there are chapters that you can digest and go through and reflect upon. All right, so maybe someday I'll go more into health storytelling, but that's a good introduction. Secondly, I'm going to go through this video straight through. I have terrible neuropathy right now as I'm healing the co-infections in my hand and my finger, and so it's really hard for me to use my computer and do editing. I had recorded this second part of my Lyme story months ago and had been very slowly chipping away at editing it and adding a plethora of SpongeBob memes and infographics about Lyme and sleep paralysis, which I'm going to talk about, and facts and articles, because I like to do that sort of stuff. But then I broke my computer, so now it's lost. And it's important for me just to get this out and then move on. So apologies in advance if it's kind of rambling and not perfectly edited and there's breaks and whatever. But to make up for it, I am using a real microphone. So hopefully the sound quality will be better than the video quality. Okay, let's get into it. My last video, I left off with graduating high school. I had kind of a big flare at that point with a reaction to a medication. I became very depressed for probably the only time in my life. I had Mycoplasma pneumonia, which I'm still dealing with like right now. And yeah, so I'm going to pick up from then. I'm going to start this story by when I went to college. My first big flare was when I was 20 in my third year of university. So I'll just talk a little bit about my first year and second year, what my health was like, and then get into the big flare. So my first year of college was great. As much as I really hate the generational lines, because the cynic in me just thinks that it's a way for us to self-select which marketing category we belong to. I am indeed a true millennial in the fact that I graduated in the year 2000. So things were very different back then. And I want to bring this up because stress and turmoil that we're going through, don't ever doubt that it has an effect on your health. Now, some people are more immune to it than others, but at the very least, just consider how much more expensive things are, how much more you need to work to get by. And that can really impact your health if you go into debt buying herbs or supplements or seeing Lyme litter at MDs or something where before you might not have had to. So let me give an example. In the year 2000, I went to the second most expensive state university that I could. And it was kind of like, oh gosh, should I go here? It costs a little bit more than other places. And my first semester of tuition was $1,800. And there was something else going on, and that was in the middle of the 2000s. A ton of funding to higher education got cut federally and pretty much in every single state. So in the year 2000, I was eligible for Wisconsin state grants and loans. And so I had no interest loans, and I had a ridiculous amount of grants because I was the first person in my family to go to college, because I just applied for it because I was low income. It was the first time in my life I didn't have to work since I was 13. I'd been working since I was in 8th grade. And I didn't have to. It was amazing. I had more money and I didn't have to work, and I was going to university. And it was incredible. There was something very, very stressful that happened at this time, which is also related to financial stress. And that is, I was in this minor, completely asinine fender bender, which was not my fault. So I was stopped to take a left turn and somebody ran into me. And because I said, oh, sorry, they were like, well, because you said that, now you're at fault. And so I was sued for $600,000 for this ridiculous minor fender bender that wasn't even my fault. And they also sued my mom because she was the owner of the car. And so this kind of set off a number of years. I would say it was like 6 or 7 years of like stress with cars, finances, getting around, that really impacted my health. There's no doubt about it. And it made me very fatigued, for sure. Just to kind of put an end to this story, after I filed bankruptcy with them personally, right away I filed bankruptcy on behalf of my mom. I paid for her to do that because she needed to she needed to drive to go to work. And so I wanted to clear her name first. And then it took me a number of years to be able to save up enough money for myself to file bankruptcy. So after I finally did that and I got my license back, probably about 4 months later, I got this invitation to be part of a lawsuit. And it was from the insurance company that the people that hit me and sued me were with. And they said that they were suing and hopefully putting in jail the people that sued me because they turned out to be full-time insurance scammers, and they wanted me to be one of many witnesses in a case against them. Well, it was happening in Milwaukee, which was like 7 hours, 8 hours from where I lived, so I wasn't really going to go to that hearing. But it did kind of give me a little peace, I guess, to know that no, I never really was truly at fault for that. It really was, I don't know, just bad people being bad, and I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, Although it kind of sucks that they went after other people and did that too. So that was a stressful thing for sure. But still, I had such a great time my first year of college. It was wonderful. I absolutely loved living on my own. I mean, I had a roommate in a dorm, but I loved everything about it. I excelled in my class, and that was always really, really hard for me growing up because I became chronically fatigued at age 12, and then started to have chronic pain at age 14. And so I was always so exhausted and could never sleep. I had cytokine-induced insomnia, so middle school and high school was so hard because I felt like shit all the time, and my energy level was maybe like a 3 out of 10. And I'm trying to like pretend I'm a normal student who could do things, and it was just beyond my capacity. So to be doing well and taking pride in my ability to do my homework and excel it was very affirming. It showed me that I wasn't just a lazy person who couldn't handle life and couldn't get it together, but that there were some things in my life that made it hard for me in the past that now I could easily overcome. Perhaps because I wasn't like spending my time working so much, so I could focus more on school. But despite the fact of being really happy at college and loving my classes and having somewhat of a financial freedom, I was faced every day with this ever increasing intense joint pain. My wrists and hands and arms, as well as my feet, plantar fasciitis, heel spur, what have you, just continued to increase pretty much every year since I got them. So my wrist pain started when I was 16 and my foot pain started when I was 14. So by the time I was 18 in college, they were pretty bad. They just got worse every year until they went away, which I'll probably talk about in the next video. So I'd wake up in the morning feeling so happy and elated to be me in my life. I just loved it. I was genuinely on cloud nine. And so I just felt like I won the lottery. I was so happy to be on my own in college. And then I would swing my feet over the edge of the bed and the pain would come in my feet, and I would feel it in my hands, and I'd be like, oh my God, another day of all this pain. Like, oh, how could this be? So it's really hard to explain. I'm getting into the, I don't know, other side of the brain that's more mythical and subjective and something else. It's hard for me to get words. But what was going on, especially in hindsight, is I didn't become disconnected from my body. I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm so sensitive. I'm too sensitive. I need to be probably more disconnected from my body. I need to probably have a better filter so I'm not fixating on what's happening with my body. I have some neurodivergence. I have ADD. I have synesthesia. You could say from kind of a spiritual out there perspective, yeah, I'm an empath. I'm intuitive, probably because of the trauma that I went through. I had to kind of put my brain out and be like, what's happening around me? Am I safe? And so I became very hyper aware, and I was already prone to be like that. And how do I know? Because people in my family are like that. Both of my grandmas are very sensitive. And one time I saw one of my grandmas is on Facebook, and she took like a empath test that you think is probably more for like a 22-year-old girl or something. But she took it and she was like, I'm a high empath. And I'm like, oh, that's where I got it. And I remember my other grandma, she's so sweet and sensitive and caring and loving. And whenever an ambulance would be going out somewhere, my grandma would listen. She'd listen to the alarm and be like, is it a police? Is it an ambulance? Or is it a fire? She'd be able to tell which they are. And then she would be putting out her mental feelers to like where the ambulance was going and if somebody she knew lived over there. So she's just like very tuned in to like this map of, are people safe and where are they and what are they experiencing? And she would network on her phone to see what was going on. And part of that is actually pretty sweet because, you know, we used to have communities that were pretty tight knit, and she's part of an immigrant community where they had to watch out for one another. And so I think on one level that's healthy level of community, but also you know, a little bit hypersensitive there. So anyways, I can never disconnect from my body, but there was something that I could do, and I think, and that is a part of me left my body. So instead of severing my connection to, like, it was too hard to be with the pain and so I wouldn't be there, that didn't happen. A part of myself, you could say a soul part, kind of would go away because it was too much for me to handle. Now, I want to be careful because people honestly do, from a psychological standpoint, dissociate, and I'm not talking about that. So I didn't compartmentalize myself into different parts of who I was. I really felt, again, like a part of me was going elsewhere. And I think this will, I was going to say will come clearer later, but I don't know. We'll see where the story takes us. So it was a coping mechanism that I had to do because I really couldn't make sense of the fact that I was 10 out of 10 happy and in 8.5 out of 10 pain every day while being 18 years old. And so it was hard for me to maintain both of those things at the same time. Okay, so another thing happened my first year of college, and that is I became very aware that other people who were more successful, who were definitely more privileged than I, and were kind of just like gaslighting jerks, to be honest, that they would start to look down on people like me. And I started to see that other people thought that I should be more ambitious, that I shouldn't be experiencing what I was experiencing. Now, I didn't go around telling very many people that I was in pain, that I had insomnia, that I was fatigued. It didn't really come up a lot. But let me give 2 examples. One is I did a nannying position over the summer, and it became very clear that they were hoping for more of a energetic go-getter that would just wake up at the butt crack of dawn and like take care of everything. And because I had insomnia, I would sleep in as far as I could. Now I was still getting up at like 8 o'clock, but if you're a nanny, kids get up early, right? They never actually asked me to wake up early. So that was on them. You need to be clear with your staff. But I could tell that they were resentful, and it wasn't just a hypersensitivity. It really was true that they were like, oh, we got a bad one because she doesn't have any energy. And I was like, I can't do anything about that. Like, unless you want me to become so sleep deprived that I'm unsafe to drive. And so that made me feel kind of self-conscious. And ashamed of who I was and how I was experiencing life. And I became a little hard on myself. Like, God damn it, Celia, just get your life together and go to sleep and just make it happen and do the right thing. And I knew that I couldn't will that to happen and that it wasn't necessarily a personal flaw. I never thought it was part of a disease process in a million years, but I always thought it was a personal thing that I could blame myself for. But yet I knew I was powerless to change that. So the consequence of that is that I became disconnected with people who were more successful than me, who were more privileged than me, who were more out there. You know, if somebody looked like they had it all together and I felt like they were going to judge me, I'm like, I'm just not even going to be a part of that club. I'm not going to go to that student government. I'm not going to go to this meeting. I'm not going to try to talk over here. I just kind of relegated myself into one of those people. Of course, I didn't have the label chronic illness or anything like that to help clarify my position of why I was like that. But my world became a lot smaller, and that would continue. I mean, it still continues on to this day. It's something I constantly need to work on and not get my self-worth wrapped up in how my physical body is performing in a overly performative, overdoing American society. Another thing is that I started to realize that there were some real jerks and gaslighters out there. I felt it a little bit in the medical community, not too much. I wasn't really seeking answers for some of the pain and the other things that I was going through. But I had a boyfriend at the time who we would be driving, let's say, and I couldn't use my wrists to drive. I'd put my arms through the steering wheel and drive with my forearms or my elbows because my arms were in so much pain. My hands were, I couldn't use them. Not only were they in pain, but they lost functionality. And after a year of being together, my boyfriend was like, you know what? I don't really believe that you have carpal tunnel. And me being, I don't know, overly trusting, used to jerks, I'm not sure. I was like, oh, you just don't understand what it's like because you've never had it. And, it's a real thing and this. And he didn't want to hear any of that. And so that made me realize just how invisible you can be when you have chronic pain, even by those that supposedly love you or understand you, those closest to you. And that, again, continues all over with all sorts of people. There's just the amount of gaslighting you get from being in pain, having a chronic illness, chronic fatigue, Lyme, oh my God, and the co-infections, you bet nobody, it's like we're programmed not to believe that, which is very, very sad, and I hope that we can change it. So the funny thing is that my boyfriend's dad owned a business, and one of his employees developed carpal tunnel and needed to have surgery or physical therapy or both or something, and had to get a workers' comp case, and the business had to compensate for that and then not have a worker for a while as he was recovering. And the dad would say, I don't believe that my employee has carpal tunnel because I've done the same work 20 years longer than he has. And I've used the same tools and everything, and I've never developed carpal tunnel, but I do the same thing. So how could using a wrench fixing cars cause carpal tunnel? Because all sorts of people do it and they don't get hurt. Therefore, this person is lying and scamming me, and I don't believe it's true. And so my boyfriend, the mini-me of his dad, started to gaslight me the same way. In retrospect, this taught me that there are just jerks everywhere, and it does not reflect anything on me. They're going to say that to anybody. It's not personal, but it's a good indicator of people who just they're not on the same page with you, and I don't think you need to tolerate that. Sometimes it's hard because you don't have any choice but to tolerate that. Let's say if you have parents or really close family members, it's not like you can just break up with them. So, yeah, there's really no straight up quick answer to that, but there are communities where people will understand what you're going through. So I would encourage anybody to seek out those more supportive groups and just try not to take that personal. If somebody else was in your shoes, they probably would do the same thing to them. All right, let's go on to my second year of college. Uh, this was a pretty stressful year. I moved to a different school, and that was, on one hand, a really big mistake, and I had a really hard time in this new place. And this is just, nothing to do with Lyme. It's just my own young person experimenting with decision making. I basically wanted to go to this school because my boyfriend was going to go there, and one of my very best friends was going to go there. So I thought it would be fun to be around them. Now, I had plenty of friends at this other place that I lived, but it was pretty far from home, and I kind of was homesick. So, I mean, in the end, just don't make decisions based on other people, but you kind of have to just try it out and then learn for yourself. And, I was 19, so okay, good. Got that one off my checklist. I don't have to do it again later. The day before school started, my boyfriend and I broke up, and that was probably a good thing because he was the one that didn't believe I had carpal tunnel. Oh yeah, I'm just making this up for fun. It's just so fun not to be able to use my hands. It's just a game I like to do, Like, well, how could anybody make that up even if you wanted to? You probably would slip and then not be in pain or use your hands or something, but I couldn't. I was in pain 24/7 since I was 16 years old, every single day, every moment. It never went away. So, uh, yeah. And then 9/11 happened and everybody freaked out, understandably, I guess. But it was basically like a low level of paranoia and maybe a high level of paranoia. And my very good friend, one of my best friends who was going to college with me, packed up and moved home. So both of the people that I moved there for were out of my life within 11 days. So now I lived in this new place. It was a much more expensive college. It was a town of 100,000 people. So compared to Milwaukee, I think Milwaukee is like probably over 1 million people. It's huge. And it has pretty good public transportation. This place did not. So sometimes I'd have to wait for the bus for a really long time, walk uphill both ways. It's a very hilly town. So honestly, you really do have to walk uphill both ways. And that would be fine. I like walking, but if you have a chronic illness and you're chronically fatigued and you don't sleep and you are sick all the time, it totally fucking sucks to like walk up hills when you have a burning sore throat and you can't breathe. And I just wasted all my energy like trying to get places. And then I had to work, so that took up more time. It was a hard time. Now, in the end, it turned out to be a good experience because I met some very good friends there. I met my husband. We met over 20 years ago there. I got my dog. We lived in this beautiful nature town where you could hike all the time. So I'm glad I don't have a time machine and I'm not forced to like make this decision over again because it was such a bad decision. But in the end, it worked out. That back to my second year of college. Sorry, I'm waxing poetic, but it was so hard. That's all I want to say. It was okay. I'll just leave it at that. It was just challenging to get around, to pay for my life, and to be sick all the time. So what do I mean by be sick all the time? I was still in a cycle since high school of having chronic respiratory infections and regular colds. And when I moved to Duluth, I started to get more frequent colds. So I would basically have a cold every month and possibly twice a month. So it was kind of like I had a cold all the time, but it would go up and down and up and down and up and down. And the main symptoms that I had that made it just kind of suck were a burning, painful sore throat and lung infection level of pain. So it just would go into my chest and be in my throat, and it just constantly was on this flare, slightly better, flare, slightly better cycle. In the spring of my second year of university, I got mono, and that was challenging. So it was just a very, very intense sore throat and crippling fatigue. It was so hard. Feverish, very swollen glands. I almost got my tonsils removed because they were touching one another and I could hardly breathe. So I wasn't sleeping for days on end because I couldn't get any air in. I was just an absolute wreck the spring semester of my second year of university. Now, looking back, it's like, I hope I would never be in this situation again, because I ended up slogging through and just getting like D's in all my classes because I just wanted to finish the semester. But why this was kind of a questionable thing is I was trying to like do stuff while I was in bed with mono, and I still struggle with Epstein-Barr today. So I might, if my kids were in university, I probably would encourage them to take time off and get a doctor's note and heal. And if that means that they have to take a whole year off and start that class again 1 calendar year from now, I would say do it, because you don't need to have a lifetime of freaking Epstein-Barr. If you can prevent that, prevent it. But, yeah, I did not have the wherewithal to do that at all. So, I mean, I didn't even know that was a choice. I didn't know. So for me, it was just easier just to do it and get very bad in my classes. But the repercussions of that is I was sick for many, many months after. So in the summer after my second year of university, I was still really, really sick. And I had constant respiratory infections, this chronic, very bad burning sore throat that just made me cry and not want to sleep. And I would regularly have fevers. Now, looking back, a part of me wonders if this was part of the Lyme co-infection picture, because I would have low-level intermittent fevers. But I also know that a lingering mono can do the same. I just don't know which was which. Were they feeding back on each other? All I know is that I felt like shit. I had regular fevers and respiratory problems and sore throat. And crazy bone breaking fatigue. Just like, oh my God, so hard to function. So, but something wonderful happened at this time. One of my good friends told me that I should go see this person that she worked for. My friend worked at this acupuncture herb shop in my tiny hometown of, at that time, 600 people, which is amazing that that small rural area would have such a high quality herbalist acupuncturist there. She had a full apothecary, Chinese and Western herbs, and tons of supplements, and she knew her shit. And so I went there and she made me a tea, and I was absolutely just taken aback. I'm like, what is this medicine? This is the first time that I've ever felt any sort of relief or comfort from anything that I've ever taken. Just drinking the tea. Now, it took a while for it to really go away, but I could tell while the tea was going down my throat and over my very sore tonsils that in that second of bathing the local area with the tea, that was comfort. That was therapeutic. It was like, I don't know what, like a soothing balm to my very inflamed lymphatic tissue. It was amazing. And I kind of remember the tea too. It had Oregon grape, which is a very important herb for any of the co-infections in Lyme because it contains berberine. Echinacea, which is very wonderful for a T cell stimulator, and it helps with lymphatic any and everything and clears heat. It had burdock and yellow dock, Yeah, and then I had a side tea of red clover. Oh, so wonderful. So at that moment on, I was a convert. Now, I don't want to act like I think herbs are a religion, but if they were, I was now their number one card carrying member. So I started to work with Dina, the practitioner there, and I worked on and off with her for 4 years and just immersed myself in herbalism. And that's its own story for another time. So I started my third year of college, guarded, armed with some new herbal supports. So I had different teas I was drinking, and I had some herbs to help me through those times where I felt like I was having, about to come down with a cold. And that really helped me. It was wonderful. I also discovered Chinese medicine around this time and started to do moxa, which is a heat therapy for my wrists and my feet. And that really, really helps. That's totally for another video as well. So I had some help. But when you are going through a flare, you can throw the kitchen sink at it. If it's something that your body is going through, if it were so easy to just take some herbs and make a flare not happen, we wouldn't have them, right? So my first big flare began at this time. Okay. So I'm getting into that hard to speak zone of, it's more of like a felt sense that I associate with this time, and some emotions that I associate with this big flare time, my third year in college when I was 20, are absolute desperation and completely overwhelmed. And it basically felt like I was in a wicked washing machine from hell that just kept spinning me around and around and around. I could never get off. It was a constant, continual cycle of symptoms that built upon itself. So that's what it felt like. And the funny thing is as I tell this story, when I just talk about what happened during the flare, it's so underwhelming. It's like, that was it. And that's something that I find when I do personal storytelling. This is the paradox of talking about your health in general, which is very complex and personal on one hand. Is the paradox is like some things that seem really small and practically meaningless, or you forget about them when you look back on your health story, they become very interesting points that turned out to be pivotal to your story, where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was so important. Wow. And then the things that seem huge, like this big flare that was so troubling to me, when I talk about it, I was like, that was it. It's kind of underwhelming to bring it up. And now I don't want to make meaning about it or say one thing is more important than the other, but it's just an interesting thing to note when you tell your story. Okay, so back to what happened during this flare. What defines this flare to me is I had systemic yeast that absolutely drove me 100% bananas. If you've had yeast, then you know. Okay, I'll go into all of these in a little bit. Second of all, I had sleep paralysis, which was very horrifying, and also very inconvenient, I mean, and it really caused like a loss of self. There was something that moved in and was kind of attacking me when I was sleeping, and I could get no rejuvenating rest. That was a big part of why this thing cycled, as I never ramped down. I could never get a break, could never take a breath, because when I went to sleep, I would have sleep paralysis and would be fighting for the integrity of the small amount of soul that I had left, Thirdly, I had visitations by ghosts, and in particular, one dead person who was pleading with me to help them cross over. Now that sounds like something that I don't want to bring up in like a health story, but can I just say Bartonella? Bartonella can cause a lot of, straight up frank psychosis in some people. Not that visitations from dead people always mean that you are experiencing psychosis, but I think it kind of expands the idea of what we think normal is happening. And fourthly, I had a newly developed, very severe back pain that made it extremely hard to be in my body and do anything: standing, sitting, walking, using my hands, wearing a backpack, eating, writing, whatever. And then that lasted for about 4 months of this very, very intense sleep paralysis, yeast going absolutely nuts phase. And then for maybe the next 4 months after that, things ramped down where the sleep paralysis fizzled out at the same time that the yeast went from being 10 out of 10 driving me crazy to about 6. So when the yeast got very severe, the sleep paralysis was also very severe. And then when they became a little bit lower, then I was able to kind of move out of the big flare phase and enter into the world of just being chronically ill all the time, which I'll talk about in my next video. So that's a synopsis of the big flare. And let me get into some of the details now. So one of the side effects from the medication reaction that I talked about in my first video, after I graduated high school, I had a reaction to a liver-related medicine, and one of the side effects was severe acne just popped out of my skin. And I tried some pharmaceuticals for that, and one of them was tetracycline antibiotics. Now, it's interesting to note that doxycycline is in the tetracycline group. And if you do a Google search, you will find very antiquated research, notes, nursing manuals, pharmaceutical manuals that say tetracycline itself is a treatment for Borrelia. And I do not believe that that's true. That's old evidence, and obviously it wasn't very effective because, how many cures was that producing? Probably not very many at all. And doxycycline, is the preferred antibiotic kind of go-to in conventional medical settings. Of course, there are other things you can do. If you see a Lyme literate MD, they might try something else. So, or a combination or something. But I want to bring this up because I always wonder, was the tetracycline that I was taking for acne doing anything at all for the Lyme and co-infections that I had and was undiagnosed? First of all, I had no reduction of symptoms in my pain at all. I had an increase in pain during about the 2 years that I was on tetracycline. So I know it wasn't killing any Lyme to kill, reduce joint pain whatsoever. I know that for a fact. But perhaps was it acting in any possible way to push some Borrelia into cyst form or something like that? Because when I stopped the tetracycline, obviously the yeast totally took over. I started with a vaginal yeast infection, which was 10 out of 10, completely irritating all the time. It made it very challenging to be in my body. It was very itchy. I had it tested. It was not any type of yeast that was known, in the gynecological world, and so they couldn't give me an anti-yeast medication like diflucan for it because it wasn't like candida or whatever it is. They knew it was yeast, but they didn't know what kind. It wasn't showing up on a test. So I didn't take that conventional route, and I had to kind of figure out what to do with it on its own. Which, just to cut to the chase, I used boric acid suppositories, and that really helped, even systemically, which I'm not going to get into, but that's one way that you can treat yeast is through boric acid. So let me recombobulate my yeast story. Even just talking about yeast, I get this frantic feeling. It's like a trauma response of what it was like to have the yeast just run amok in me. One of the main systemic yeast issues that I had was this intense brain pressure. Now, I used to call it, well, actually, no, I never called it brain fog. But now that I've learned about Lyme, I was like, maybe I should call it brain fog. But doing a search on brain fog and chronic illness or Lyme, people say that brain fog is like memory issues, not remembering things, forgetting things, not thinking straight, just kind of slow cognition. And that is not at all how I experience brain fog. Brain fog to me is like there's something happening with my head. Like I can feel it. It feels like TMJ in my cranium bones and then also in the brain tissue underneath or the fluid. I'm not exactly sure what's going on in there, but it's like a pain and a discomfort as if I'm wearing a ill-fitting metal cap or like armor. That's how brain fog feels to me. It's just is like a pain thing that's not quite a headache, but almost. During this yeast time, I had what honestly literally felt like the shape and size and weight and texture and temperature of a brick in my head. Like just implanted right here. It was like a brick was wedged into my head that went all the way through. It was very dense and heavy and hard. And it was constantly there. Now, this is probably part of my synesthesia. Like, I really was like, it literally feels like there's a brick wedged into my head. That's the best way to describe it. So that was one of my main yeast symptoms. Another was this constant high level of irritation. Yeah, I was like itchy, hot, red, on my nerves or something. Now, I didn't have any skin issues per se, so I didn't become physically itchy, hot, or red. And my skin didn't itch. I itched underneath the skin, and it was all of me. Now, the yeast would flare. I would feel it like a vaginal yeast flare, like, oh my God, I'm getting attacked by the yeast, super itchy. And then this wave would come all over my body. It would come up to my brain and come into my chest. I remember that. And in the gut, of course, it's like there was like a bajillion little creatures in there burning fires. And then down into my legs, in particular into my shins and my feet. So the yeast just made it extremely hard to be present in my body. And I do believe at that time, I again further separated outside of myself. So a part of me couldn't handle what was going on in here and flew away. Because I have never been successful at making a bridge between my body and myself. So I just went the other way. Okay, so there's the yeast. Probably like the week after the yeast got to a 10 out of 10 constant irritation and systemic full body problem, then the sleep paralysis began. So sleep paralysis has two parts. One is just that you can't move because you wake up and you're paralyzed. And so that's inconvenient. It's not fun. I would sleep in public sometimes because I had insomnia and I was a college student. So I would be like in the library studying and I would like wake up and know that I needed to go somewhere or know that there were like people around me, and I would open my eyes, but I couldn't shut them or move them. And then I would notice that I was drooling like all over my arm or something. And people were like, hey, are you okay? And I couldn't move. And I was like, oh God, please go away. Because you can't do anything. You just like wait for the moment to pass. Like, oh my God, please wake up. Come on. You can't do anything. You just have to wait. So that would happen. And that is just annoying and not fun. And it is a little jarring. There is a fear response too. So that is its own level of stress on the body, but not nearly as stressful as the other aspect of sleep paralysis. And that is when something comes, like an entity or a demon, or a lot of cultures say like a hag would come and sit on your chest and suffocate you That's kind of the most cross-cultural example of what happens during sleep paralysis. I didn't have that specific demon sitting on the chest. It's interesting, if you Google videos or pictures of sleep paralysis, that is a common like painting or image that people all over the world have talked about. Mine was a little different. I just had entities that would come into my body, open it up, grab onto my soul, and take it out of my body. So I had these soul extractions. And over the course of these 4 months, they kept getting more of my soul and dragging it further and further away from me, and kind of getting rid of it or bringing it to another level. So sometimes they would just come into my body, grab my soul, and then they would pull it out to the end of my bed. And it was a very excruciating, painful process for me. I mean, not only am I not in control, but like I can kind of feel the fabric of what keeps me together. It felt like you were maybe pulling out an organ or something that was like, I need that and I'm going to bleed out, except it's not really blood. It's something else. But put it back together. Sometimes they would take my soul out and flush it down the toilet or put it down the drain in the bathroom. Sometimes they would bring it out above my house and go out the chimney or like little vents. And then eventually they were just taking it up and out to other realms, kind of like some sort of underworld type place. So that went on for about 4 months, and it was not fun at all. At the same time, I was having dreams that dead people were asking me for help. Now, people can be professional mediums and do this sort of stuff. And I think that you can learn how to work with dead people and pass them over in a responsible, therapeutic way that does not put any sort of stress on the practitioner doing it. And if it's too much for them, you would ask for help. Or, I mean, people all over the world and throughout time have probably done this, and there probably is a very responsible way to do it, is all I want to say. I did not know any of that. I didn't know what was going on. All I knew is that the times that I was sleeping, that I was not having sleep paralysis, having my soul sucked out, then I was continually barraged by dead people. And in particular, there was one friend that passed away when we were 13. She was the best friend of mine. I was very close to her. It was very sad, of course. But she kept coming to me being completely distraught. And it was very emotionally challenging for me to see her be like, I'm dead. I don't know where I am. I don't know why this happened. This shouldn't have happened. I feel horrible. I don't want this to happen. Like, I just want to be alive. Like, can you help me? And I just didn't know what to do. And then I kind of put up some barriers, and then she would sneak in my dreams and wear like masks and pretend that she was alive, but I knew she wasn't. And I'd have to confront her. And it went on for a really, really long time. And so why is this part of the flare? I want to bring this up because mental health is definitely something that can be affected by Lyme and the co-infections. So even if your body is not going through something, or if it is, you may have other things on top of that. And that's what was going on for me. Now, interesting, when I looked in the mirror and looked at my life and felt into my mood, I did not have depression, did not have anxiety, and I did not have any sort of what you would think of as Western psychological issues. I wasn't bipolar. Not to self-diagnose myself, but I never had any inkling to go anywhere else. As far as I was concerned, this was all happening kind of in this dreamy soul, otherworld level. It wasn't my psyche having a problem. It was like my soul or my spirit or my energy. Does that make sense? Like, even my emotional life was hard. I was extremely distraught, but I never was depressed. Now, if you are depressed or you do have anxiety, that's totally fine. I'm not trying to say that I'm any sort of lucky person by not struggling with that. It's not better than, there's nothing that I take responsibility to say that I am immune to that. Okay, so no judgment or, anything about mental health compared to physical health or spiritual health or whatever. Okay. It just was a very, very interesting thing, and I want to bring it up because some people might put those symptoms aside and think like that was something that they were dealing with that has nothing to do with their Lyme. And I don't want to say that all of that was completely because of Lyme, Bartonella, and yeast, and Mycoplasma, Babesia. Because I have a tendency to be like that anyways, even as a kid. I've always been into dreams, and I don't know. That's just my personality. But yeah, I think there is a very big correlation between this experience of sleep paralysis and Lyme and the co-infections, and in particular the yeast. So I just want to put that out there, and we might not get clear exact answers. We might not get 100% correlation between systemic yeast and visitations by dead people. There might not be. But there definitely is between trauma. That is for sure. And I dealt with trauma, and there is a certain level of trauma just by having chronic illness or going through a really, really hard time. So there is evidence about that. I did put some of those studies in my really meme and infographic filled video that I lost on the computer that I broke. But you can go look that up on your own. Yeah, there was a lot of research that came out of Southeast Asia when there was a lot of trauma, military action happening with refugees from Cambodia and Laos, and they looked at the amount of dead people they were talking to, and and the level of trauma that they went through. Now, they are a spiritual group of people. That's part of their cosmology. So there are people who don't necessarily have trauma in their culture that has the ability to talk to ancestors, for instance. But there was a high level of increased contact with dead people who weren't ancestors, who were hard to deal with and have very stressful events when people went through a lot of trauma. So that's a part of it that I want to bring up. Basically, I just don't want there to be like stigma or to think that we need to compartmentalize our Lyme stories because they don't fit into like, I only had joint pain, or I only had POTS, POTS, or I only had whatever. All sorts of things can happen. Okay. And the back pain. So yeah, this was really hard. This pushed me over the edge. One day I had to write a paper, and of course I'm procrastinating. So I sit down and write this paper. It's like a 12-page paper on climate change. I remember it was about carbon footprint, which was like a new idea at this time, so long ago. And I think part of the reason that I never got interested in learning about climate change was because this paper caused me so much pain that I wanted only to take all of my books about climate change and just burn them and never look at them again because of my own issues with how I felt writing that paper. So yeah, my computer was on the floor and I kind of hunched down and typed. And by midnight, my back started to hurt. And it's my upper back between my spine and my scapula. And I still have problems there to this day. But it has morphed from being less about back pain and more about just very intense nerve ganglia issues along the upper spine. Particularly now that I'm working with co-infections, this area of my spine gets really inflamed. But at this particular time, my third year of college, it just became some super intense back pain that I would be laid flat on my back for many days, like not being able to breathe or move or eat or do anything. It would just go out. And it always was a high level of probably a 7 or 8 out of 10 every day. So eating, like cooking and writing and doing any of my jobs, driving, walking, standing, wearing a backpack, everything hurt it. I never not felt pain with this. And I have a kind of a theory, a personal theory, that when I have pain, the closer the pain is to my head, the more it affects my level of despair. There's something about having pain around here where I'm very sensitive to it. I recently had this upper back pain around my spine flare a few months ago when I had a Bartonella flare, and it was a pretty bad pain, but it wears on me mentally, and it seems like too much to handle. Where I get pelvic pain and like SI joint pain, and it totally sucks because I can't move, but it doesn't give me the same level of despair as pain in between, I don't know, my shoulder blades up. So this time where I had a flare in the same area where this back pain hurt, this was the first time of having chronic pain since I've been 12, where I just reached to open up the fridge and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to project my opinion, but I think I know why people do opiates, because I honestly don't know how I can keep going on with this pain. It's too much for me to bear, and I just can't do it. Now, even though that level of pain is the same, if not less, than some of the pelvic pain or foot pain or leg pain that I had, there's something about just getting up in here. Maybe it has to do with the cranial nerves. I don't know. But in any case, I just want to give that explanation because that back pain was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. It became very hard to be in my body yet again. And it brought me to tears pretty much every day. And I'm not a crier. So to be pushed to that level of like, I don't know how I can do this. I thought the foot and hand pain was enough. Now I have this chronic yeast that is driving me bananas. Like my brain hurts and itches and is on fire. And then I can't sleep at night. I mean, I do sleep, but I don't get any rest. I wake up having waged battle, trying to hold on to my soul from multiple entities, stealing it out of my body, and lost repeatedly every night. Like, didn't you take enough of it? Why do you have to keep coming back for more? It's all gone. I'm empty. Okay. And then the only times I do sleep, people are coming to me being like, help me, I'm dead. I don't like this. And then the back pain was just too much. So that was my first big flare. It just was constant, chronic, never a break, never a rest. And now that I've learned about inflammation, inflammation is just up here. It never gets a quench. It never gets a chance to quiet down. What did help slowly with time was working on an anti-yeast diet and reducing sugar. Now, I've never really been a big sugar person. Like, I never eat candy and never ate a lot of sugar. Let's say maybe once a month I would have a cookie at like a coffee house or something. But I found that I became so sensitive to sugar that I couldn't have corn syrup and ketchup or like sugar in what's it called, like salad dressing. Even that tiny bit was too much for me. So I started to take the sugar out, and that was a huge effing deal. It lasted many years to work with the yeast and work with the sugar. It was very intense. I can't even start to go into it here. But all I have to say is that now if I go on a little bit of a sweet I indulge in that for like a few days. Like I go out to a shop with my kids and have like something like a donut, or I don't know what I would even do. But if I have too many sweets now, I know that if I stop within 3 days and I just increase my protein and eat greens and like drink water, like I will not be craving it probably within 3 days. Now, at that time, it was no way was it a 3 day clearing of that sugar craving. It was intense. It was like I was a zombie for the yeast that wanted the sugar. I really, yeah. It's hard to talk about, but if you've had yeast, then you know what I mean. Or if you've had issues with sugar, like really bad, where your body was like, you felt it was going to self destruct if you didn't get it. And if you said, no, I'm not doing it, then you have major symptoms for a long time. So I started to kind of cut back on sugar and do this anti-yeast diet, and it took a while. At first it flared up, so that was during the flare, but slowly after that it kind of went down to, like I said, a level of 6 out of 10 with the yeast. It took a whole nother probably 18 months for me to get off of both totally like stop the sugar battle and have the yeast resolved. So it was a big process, and best of luck to anybody going through anti-yeast anything or cutting back on sugar. It's no joke. Be gentle with yourself. Think long term. It's painful, I know, and I have nothing but compassion for you. Let's see. Yeah, and then at the same time that the yeast subsided, the sleep paralysis started to fade. The dreams about people coming me for help being passed over, the dead people dreams, that slowly ramped down. Perhaps I would have like a few times a year for a few years after that. So that also kind of got a little bit better as I got out of the shadow of the intense yeast. And the back pain. The back pain continued and put me into a fair amount of problems until I went to acupuncture school in 2010 when I was 27, and I got acupuncture on my back like twice a week because I was starting to do schoolwork and wear a backpack again a lot. And I just was like, I'm going to get this treated. And it totally went away. Now, I still have problems in the spine, but that kind of comes and goes with intense Lyme co-infection flares, and it is getting better the longer I do treatment. So I just want to give you a picture about what was going on there. Okay, so that's about the flare. And one other thing I want to touch on before I go is like some contributing factors to this. I already talked about being on tetracycline and how that obviously contributed to the yeast. And the yeast was hard for my body to break down. I know that for sure. And so I was super heavy loaded on this like yeast die off. And I think when that happened, like my own lymphatic and digestive eliminative processes all got clogged. And that was a big contributor of being super inflamed all the time. Having the very, very acute back pain was very, very high inflammation for me. And I even believe, it's hard to say exactly, I haven't seen any research about this, but I think that just high levels of inflammation for me could be related to the sleep paralysis. It's just kind of like a level of irritation or like inability to fully rest and relax. So it was just a very highly inflammatory time for me. Let me just take a minute and think about some other things. Okay, during this time, I was at my wit's end. I didn't think I could keep going. And I would look in the mirror and be like, I'm not depressed. I'm not bipolar. I know I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not anxious. I'm happy for real. But yet this is happening. How can this be? Like, what is happening? I could never really get a grip on it. I remember waking up in the morning, and remember when I said my first year of college, I would be super joyous to be like, I'm living on my own in college. And then I would swing my feet over the edge and be like, fuck, I'm in pain. Why is this happening? This was a similar pattern here, except I wasn't just annoyed and irritated. I was absolutely 100% desperate. And I didn't belong to a religion at that time, but I would desperately plead and pray every single morning. It was like, I have no idea how I'm going to get around, how I'm going to show up to do things that I have to do, how I'm going to feed myself, how am I going to take a shower, how am I going to go up to use the bathroom right now? Like, I didn't even trust my ability to take care of even my most basic needs because I was so exhausted. I was in so much pain, and I felt just totally out of sorts. So I would curl up in a ball when my alarm would go off in the morning to get to my 8 o'clock chemistry class. And I would be sitting in child's pose. And with all of that childish, childlike energy where you would wish for something, like when I was a kid, I would wish on wishbones or like shooting stars for things that I wanted, like a Barbie and the Rockers, really bad. I would just plead, like, please, please, please help me get through this day. I have no idea how I'm going to, but somehow I have to, and I have no, how is this possible? Somebody's gonna have to help me. Something is going to have to help me. I cannot do this. I don't know what's happening. This is too much. What's going on? It was a high level of desperation and panic, and I was pleading with I don't even know who to help somehow. And after a few months of that, I started to have these dreams. And this was a very nice change because I had dreams where I had sleep paralysis, demons extracting my soul, and dead people bothering me. So have a dream about something else was a good sign. And this dream was even nicer sign because there was this huge giant-like person, and she said her name was Celia too. And I realized that when I was in a fetal position, all in a ball, and I was inside of her. It was like I was a fetus inside of this giant. And she would just soothe me, to be like, I'm here for you. I know things are hard. You got this. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything at all. She would just like pat me. And I just kind of tear up thinking about this because it was the only experience of nervous system regulation, calmness, groundedness that I felt during an entire 4-month period. It was the only time where I felt a sense of like, okay, I can just be. I can just be. I don't have to be in pain. Not like that's a choice, but I didn't feel in pain in these dreams. And I just soaked that up. I just was like, I got 5 seconds in a dream where I'm in some giant's womb and she's soothing me. And I just was like, I'm going to take all of this into my spine and brain. Like, give it to me. I received it and I held it and I loved it and I would think about it. And it was the only thing that would get me through was like, oh, I guess I just need to imagine that I'm like in some sort of womb, I guess. And that's going to help me. But sometimes the imagination can be a powerful tool, and it definitely can be regulating to the nervous system. If you think kind of more on a physical level, this could be something like biofeedback, where, I don't know, you kind of just feel into your body and search for something that feels a little bit better and strengthen those nervous connections to it. So even for a second, you have some sort of variation on the feelings that you get. And so that's what was going on for me. And that was such a powerful ally. And can you replicate that? Can I replicate that? I don't know. It's just what came out of that situation. I'm very thankful for that. Second of all, during this time, another helpful thing was a variation on this theme of me being in some giant's, womb that was soothing me. I started to become interested in birth and that birth energy And later on, I became a birth doula. I was going to school in pre-med, hoping perhaps that I could be a nurse practitioner. In Wisconsin, nurse practitioners can deliver babies. They're kind of like a family practice physician in a way. So I was kind of down that track, but because I always had such severe dysmenorrhea, my interest in gynecological things was about the menstrual cycle and trying to solve why mine was so painful. And so I always focus on menstruation and the menstrual cycle in my studies, or I don't know, my interests. And now I switched to this gestation birth experience. And it's interesting looking back because I think I needed to flip the coin over of this energy that I was working with, which was like being taken out of my body and having demons extracting my soul and having my soul be brought to this underworld and having dead people talk to me. Like, that's like one side of some otherworldly place that isn't where alive people live. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but birth is another side of that, because when you're in the womb, or you're gestating somebody or whatever, they are not quite in this world yet, and they come from somewhere too, and it's just a mirror image of this energy. So instead of thinking about people that I've known that passed away, that their lives were lost and were very distraught about it, I was now kind of looking at birth and like, oh, it's different gestation energy. I would draw and paint and just play around with creative things, and I noticed that I was creating the shape, and it took form over a long period of time. That suddenly I could see that the shape was a fetus in a womb. And I was like, oh, I'm drawing this. Like, I didn't even know that this was what the shape wanted to be. And so that was, again, a kind of, I would say, art therapy, imagination therapy, working with the mythological forces, the imagination realm, to help give some sort of other view of what I was going through, other than thinking about just like the other place where my soul was being taken from. So I want to bring that up. So play around with that sort of stuff if it comes to you. And definitely, without a doubt, art therapy is therapeutic. Music therapy is very helpful too, like managing pain. This was not a part of what I did, but watching funny things and comedy can be really helpful with pain. I didn't do that then. I do that now. At the very least, it's a nice distraction for a short while. I'm going to see if there's anything else that I want to talk about. There was different things in my other video. One thing that I brought up then that I'm just going to touch briefly on is that I did some bad dietary practices that I think contributed to me having this flare and being out of my body. I started to do fasting because I heard that it was good for certain types of joint pain. Now, I do believe that still can be true, and perhaps there is some evidence about that, but like people I know in Lyme groups do intermittent fasting, and they do have improvements with their health. And I'm not going to say that that's bad to do. Everybody needs to figure that out on their own. But for me, that was very, very bad, because I am extremely deficient person. I need more nutrients. I need more regular nutrients, and I don't need less. And not having food for even a short time was very, very ungrounding to me. So I think that contributed to me flying out of my body. Like, I needed more things to anchor me here, not less. Okay. Second of all, I became a vegetarian after I was kind of traumatized by Moby and PETA. Now, if people are vegetarian for religious purposes or even your own moral or dietary reasons, that's totally fine. I don't have any judgment. You do you. For me, it was not a good fit at all. Okay, so think about this. Some people use both fasting and vegetarianism for spiritual purposes. In Christian mysticism, there was this thing called holy anorexics. It was kind of like, I don't know, the medieval form of breatharianism where there were nuns and monks that wouldn't eat, and they would levitate and they would talk to Jesus and have spiritual experiences. And I don't need that. I don't need to go other places and talk to dead people. I need to be here in my body. And, same with vegetarianism. People use that for spiritual purposes. Fasting is a part of various religions around the world. And again, I think within the certain cultural standpoint or even personal views, that's totally cool. Not good for me. I need to be more grounded on this earth, not less. Okay. So I probably should have been eating more like mineral-rich foods. There are some herbs that I now take whenever I start to get sleep paralysis that kind of anchor in the spirit and the heart. And even Epsom salt bath is amazing for sleep paralysis, or having disturbing dreams of dead people. I just kind of like work on that and it's not even a problem. But when I was 20, it was a big deal, and I didn't understand how powerful things like taking magnesium even would have been in reversing that. Okay, I need to think again if there's anything from I'm like seeing my old video in my mind and like, what else needs to be said? Oh, okay. One more thing. And that is about the herbs that I took. So I started embarking on my own herbal adventure 20 years ago this year. And I took those herbs for my sore throat and my mono and respiratory infections, and it was wonderful. I started to take herbs for preventing the chronic colds and flus that I had, and that really, really helped. But here is the thing where I think that perhaps taking some of these herbs was a contributing factor to this flare, and perhaps the herbs were helpful in getting me out of it after 4 months instead of staying there longer. But all of that was accidental. Nobody knew I had Lyme. I didn't know it. My practitioner didn't know it. So we just were clueless. But I know now that when I work on my immune system and I use herbs to fight infections or to break biofilms or to work on my lymphatic health, whatever, when I do that, my immune system goes from like sleeping and suppressed. Lyme suppresses the immune system, as do many, if not all, of the co-infections. I don't know about like half of the co-infections I'm not familiar with. Many of them do suppress the immune system so that these bacteria can stick around. So when you take herbs or other substances or do things with your life that increase your immunity, now it's like, oh, hey, look, we have some bacteria in here. We have some cysts and biofilms. Like, let's go like get rid of them. So it can make your immune system kind of come up into gear and get into fighting mode. I've seen that so much with myself. Now, it's not always like that. Sometimes, it just varies about what's going on with your body and what herbs you are taking. But I know for sure that Oregon grape, which I took a lot, is one of my favorite herbs for regulating the immune system so that it can fight when and if it needs to. And I was taking that. So I was ramping my immune system up. Now, one of the herbs that I took a lot for yeast but didn't do a goddamn thing was olive leaf. And olive leaf is a very important anti-mycoplasmal herb. So Mycoplasma has been really rough for me, and it does cause upper body pain and spine pain for me. So I see that as kind of a potential red flag for that back pain that I had, along with Bartonella and of course Lyme too. So it's just funny to think that I was kind of playing with herbs And I didn't realize that they were doing anything to these infections that I didn't know I had. So in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I might have had a flare because I was kicking my immune system into gear, and they were finding infections that they didn't know were there. Okay, so that is my long story about my first flare, and thank you for listening. And I want to give special blessings and good luck and wishes, whatever works for you, for those dealing with chronic infections, chronic pain, trauma, chronic illness of any kind. Yeah, wish you all good luck. Thanks for watching, and bye.